Yeah.
So I figure we kick this week off. Frank and I, we like to kind of alternate between different teachers, speakers, scientists, physicists, you name it. And this week on Perspective Shift, we're going to dive into Mr. Edgar Cayce.
Yeah, Edgar Cayce.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, I love this guy because I've heard about him years ago and just dabbled in a little bit of stuff. And then obviously getting prepared for the show about him, found out even more stuff they didn't know about. But yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, he was born in 1877 in Kentucky.
Yep.
And he's a farmer. He came out of farming.
I feel like anybody back then, like your role pretty much was
you were a farmer. Yeah.
You know, there wasn't a big selection of things to do.
Yeah. Either no work
in the
or
late
farming.
1800s.
Yeah, right.
But the thing that's so exciting about this, like Frank was just talking about, when we decide on these different teachers, speakers, etc., that we like to cover, we learned so much from them, like individually, like Frank and I personally. And that's why I love doing this, is it's like spiritual homework, if you will. It's really cool to hear the history, see how these different men and women played had such an impactful role in the development of consciousness in our three-dimensional society, the world that we live in, what we call reality.
Yeah, and as we dive into Edgar Cayce today, what you're going to notice is a lot of this stuff is starting to become real mainstream.
Absolutely.
And this is the point I want to make is what right now are we discussing in the development of human kind that isn't mainstream, but when you listen to it, don't deny it, but just expand, because if you were around during the 1920s, 1930s when Edgar Cayce, especially towards the end of his life, like he died in 1945, but he really became known in around 1943 is when he just took off.
That's when the newspaper articles started writing about him, and he blew up.
Yeah, within two, and then he got overexhausted. I think he was 66 when he died.
Which, by the way, they talk about. I mean, like that's like dying, pretty damn early nowadays. Like even back then, that was pretty early.
Yeah, it was still early. So, but back then, this stuff would have been like, what? Like, so remember, and that's why we're kind of featuring Edgar Cayce today, because he and the ideas of his touch into the Akashic Records, and we'll talk about that as well today. But I want people to open up the mind, and this I do that. What are we talking about today that we may not understand, but in 20, 30 years, will be
common practice.
Common practice. So keep an open mind, because the people who actually kept an open mind back then is why me and Mike are able to talk about it today.
Correct.
It wasn't shut down and just buried.
Well, it's funny. The concepts that Frank and I discuss on this show, we would have been burned at the stake talking about this stuff 100 years ago.
Yeah. And
like that's what they were doing. That's what, this was seen as witchcraft. This was seen as, hocus pocus.
Yeah, they didn't have podcasts back then, so we were lucky. Like,
seriously.
You got to start a podcast. And what's a podcast, my sonny boy?
What is this? But we're seeing these, different changes in our collective consciousness as we expand and grow and level up as a society.
Yeah.
A lot of the concepts we understand and believe today, they weren't accepted 30, 40, 50 years ago. They just weren't.
They weren't.
Like even our parents' generation, there's concepts that they have come to understand that growing up were not discussed.
No.
And this is that evolution of consciousness.
Yeah. So Edgar Cayce. So he right now is known as the most documented different words. Psychic. Prophetic prophet. Sleeping prophet. I heard that he himself would not go by those terms.
Correct.
But whatever you want to call it. But there's over 300 books written by him. Yeah. There's a foundation that still exists today. Actually, they travel throughout the country, but it's in Virginia Beach. Yeah, Virginia Beach. So this man has left a huge legacy in the time he's lived.
We have a clip from from that research center. It's called RARE, Edgar Cayce's Association of Research and Enlightenment.
Yeah.
So we'll feature a clip on that too, so you guys can dive more into this.
Yeah, and also too, as me and Mike bring this up, so we're just like touching on this. We're not there's a lot of information out there. So I suggest you go and look it up. Again, like I said, there's over 300 books. There's videos on YouTube. If you have Gaia, there's a couple of different programs. I think there's 2 of them on Gaia.
Yeah, there's a few.
But there's a lot of information out there about him. And what it is what he had said, and every person, master, prophet, whatever you want throughout history, always replicate this. And they said that every human being has the capacity to do what I do.
Yes.
They do. It's just you have to have the willingness to do it.
And I think that's an important reason why we're covering Edgar Cayce today, to show everybody at home, what really and truly you are capable of and what lies dormant within you.
Yeah, and what's cool today is when you start to step out of what you're doing, you just picture like Edgar Cayce. He was pretty psychic at a young age. I think it was like 4 years old. There was an incident on his grandparents' farm where he actually watched his grandfather drown. He went into there was a pond there. He went to cool the horse off, the grandfather did. And actually Edgar was on the horse, but then he took him off the horse. So he went into the pond to cool it off, and the horse got disturbed by something. And the grandfather's foot got caught in the stirrup, and he drowned right in front of Edgar Cayce. He was 4 years old. Well, from that time, the grandfather would come to him, and he would actually tell him stories about, like, the Civil War. So he had these psychic abilities. I don't know if it was the trauma. Like, we don't know.
Speculation.
But, speculation. They said it might have been a trauma, but I believe he came with him. It was just a kicking off point. But his grandfather would come to him and tell him stories about the Civil War and stuff. And when you bring it up to his parents, the parents are pretty open to it. But think about this. It's like when he was a kid, you're talking 4 years old this happened. So what was that, 1982, 81?
No. You mean 18.
18, sorry. 18. Yeah. 18, yeah. Because, he was born in 1877. So 4 years old, and all of a sudden the parents were somewhat encouraging it to talk about it.
And I think it helped that it was his grandfather, because that connection his parents naturally had this attachment to. So they didn't want to be like, oh, no, don't talk about your grandfather. You know what I mean? And so this was easier for it to manifest into reality because that human attachment. Just like if we have a relative or a family member that's died and you say, they're coming to you and speaking to you, nobody's going to put that down. There's like these different conditionings that we have in society. And this was one that allowed him to flourish.
Yeah, they did, like a lot of people wouldn't want their kid to be harassed. So, but they didn't worry about that. So he was able to express that, and I think because from what I understand, he was a very kind person. He actually did for people. So that's the thing where people always thought, is he a charlatan? Is he doing this? He seldom took money. So I think when people actually doing him, and that's towards the end of his life when he was doing all these readings. His guides were telling him only do 2 a day, but he was doing like 8 a day. And he was doing it because he felt the pain, and most of his readings are based on health and people like having diseases. And so he would come up, he would go into these readings. This is clear. So he would go into these Akashic Records, and people are like, what are Akashic Records? Well, there are records out there that are in the ether, in the sky, however you want to look at it, that have information about our past. When I say our, individually and collectively, throughout time, our past, our history, and our future.
All at once.
Yeah, so people are like, how is that possible? Well, we've all heard the statement that everything, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything exists now and forever will exist. So when you come into your future, the way I look at it is, our future's there. We always know that. I just haven't experienced it to put my signature on it. I didn't put my vibrational frequency signature on it. But he was able to go into these Akashic Records, and he came out with medical formulas.
And he was not a doctor. He had no medical training.
None at all. And so he was able to, on top of whatever the doctor was prescribing for the individual, he added this on, and it aided in the healing of it. And actually, some of these remedies that he came up with early in the early 1900s are still used today.
Still used today. That is really powerful.
And he himself has no idea where it came from. It just came from the ethers, is what they call the Akashic Records, and he plucked it out of the air based on the people that had the problem. So it was based on the people who had the illness, the disease, and stuff like that. He was able to see that. He also, I think it was, I think he said like 75% of his readings, I think it was over 14,000 in his lifetime. It's a lot.
That is a lot.
But 75% of them were based on health.
Correct.
Yeah.
Majority were on health. He wanted to help people.
Yeah, and the other ones were based on like, when's
World events. There was a bunch. See, the thing about Edgar Cayce is like they say like he was a psychic, like a medium who channeled, a giant spectrum. It wasn't just like, okay, I can talk about this. It was you could bring any type of question to him, and he had this ability to channel and step in, or even access the consciousness of a specific individual in a different spot of the world.
Yeah, and even as we know today, we still don't know anyone that does it in that broader perspective.
Yeah.
Again, there might be.
I'm sure that exists.
Yeah, it does, but maybe they're not as famous.
That's it.
Yeah, so I can't say that he isn't, but till date, like a lot of people say, they think he's the only one that had that broader perspective. So he could talk about health, he could talk about science, he could talk about where to dig for oil, so to speak.
And guys, like he was decades, years ahead of like himself. Back then, like he was tapping into events that were going to happen in the future, and the accuracy of these predictions is uncanny. Like,
that's the thing is some of them though, like they looked at it, they weren't as accurate as we thought. But then there were people talking about the accuracy. It's like, okay, a lot of times when he was talking about it, it could have been more metaphoric about the structure change of the earth and stuff like that. Some of that stuff didn't come true. But then they said, well, if you look at it differently, because when he predicted this would happen, it was right before World War II. So the sinking of Japan into the ocean could have been metaphoric because it entered into the war and it got decimated with 2 atom bombs, right? So the guy says like that could have been how he read it, but he's just reading it off of a thing. Because he has no, like Edgar Cayce, the man, had no interference. He was completely out. They had doctors come in to see if he was real. And when he was under, they would take needles and prick him with them. Never flinched, didn't bleed, But he said when he came out of it, he was done. Like, no, I'm not a testing kit. But
exactly.
It gave legitimacy, at least to those doctors that realized when he was under, he was under.
That's it. He went into a total trance state.
Yeah, he was stepped aside. So Edgar Cayce, the person, the man, had no influence on the information coming through.
And he said that.
Yeah.
He recognized that. He said, when he'd come out of a reading.
You don't remember anything.
Yeah, what did I say?
Yeah, I hope it worked, right?
Yeah, did you get anything? Yeah. That's like how he would act.
I say it to Karen every day. Did you get anything out of this?
You getting anything out of this?
It's like, you're saying nothing.
Are we cool?
You're saying nothing, you idiot. So I'm like the opposite of Edgar Cayce. Anything that says just do the opposite.
Oh, that's awesome. So one thing about Edgar Cayce, too, back in this time, timeline that we're discussing, is there's no actual recordings of Cayce that are, that you can just pull off of YouTube. Frank and I were trying to find some like actual recordings of Edgar Cayce speaking himself, and it was very difficult. And we found one that happened to be featured on Gaia, and it was simply him in a trance state, providing like a remedy, and so it was like a list of different like ingredients.
Hazel.
Witch hazel, all these
Pure
types of
olive
things.
Oil.
Yeah, exactly. These little components to a remedy, like a for health. And so we're not going to feature that today. So we found some different stuff on the history of Edgar Cayce that we wanted to share with you, and then we also found from the Edward Cayce Foundation, the ARE that we mentioned in the beginning of this episode, the Association of Research and Enlightenment, some of the concepts that they touch on. Because what's cool is here we are 90 years later, and not only are his readings still being used by people to this day, but the ideas behind his readings are being fully embraced and legitimized in modern-day science. And this is so cool to see, this span years and decades, and to hear a gentleman like this with a background of Christianity. Like, he was a Christian, and so he taught Sunday school. Great guy, right? And
he read the Bible like 60 times.
He was a big Bible reader, all this. And when he started to kind of channel into, these, or when he started to channel and do these and go deeper into remedies for individuals and tap into their consciousness, he began to see past lives. And then that's when reincarnation came up. And reincarnation, I don't know how many of you have been raised Christian or Catholic. I myself was raised Catholic growing up. But these concepts are not only not discussed, but they're shooed away. And we are conditioned to believe that they do not exist.
But they actually do exist in the Bible, though.
Absolutely.
They just don't use the word reincarnation.
The way that we are explained the Bible, the way we are taught, reincarnation is not an element of modern day Christianity or Catholicism, and it needs to be.
It's starting to change because everlasting life is the understanding, and it's more of like you say reincarnation. It's actually multiple simultaneously incarnations
because it's all at the same time.
Well, because there's no like you have somebody like say, okay, I'm a reincarnation of this person, but you aren't that person. You're actually maybe channeling information the same way where they got it, but you have your own signature. You have different fingerprints. So you're an incarnation, not a reincarnation.
Gotcha.
It's like watching the same movie over and over. So there's there's a couple of people talking about that. You could channel other information into. So we're actually incarnations, but because we're experiencing this information now, it isn't a redone. It's not like a rewatching the same movie. Mm-hmm. It's an extension. It's like a part 2 of Rocky.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Well, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because that is true. It's like when we come here, we're not coming back as the same person. We're coming back here to learn and remember what and who we are.